Mr. Carlson, why not drill in the Great Lakes?
I don't believe that first of all, we discovered any oil there. The testing has shown that there isn't, but you know what there is here in Michigan? We are sitting on a huge dome of natural gas. It's not in the Great Lakes, but it's right here in the landmass. And for example, the coal-fired energy plant that was proposed for the Saginaw Bay region was predicated on the use of coal. Why was that the case when we have so much natural gas right here? And we need to simply tap our resources here in Michigan. That could be a huge revenue generator for us here in Michigan going forward. What's the problem? Well, the problem is we have so many regulations that prevent that from happening. But right here now, for example, in Lenawee County, we have drilling going on for gas and oil. And that should be encouraged. We don't need to be in the Great Lakes. We have plenty of opportunity right here in the landmass of Michigan.
Agree or disagree?
I agree that we have opportunities in the landmass of Michigan. There are known fields, and they're discovering more ways to get at them every day. We should not be in the Great Lakes. It's a natural resource that we have, one of the best resources, if not the best, in Michigan. And it's an enclosed environment that's freshwater. That basically, if you have an oil spill in the level that you have down in the Gulf, you know, we're in trouble. I mean, we're already in trouble watching out for the Asian carp that, for the life of me, I can't understand.
The Gulf's in trouble too, though.
It is, but there's a better system of cleaning it out eventually over time, and we've seen that happen 60 years ago when there was an oil spill as well. But in the enclosed fresh water that we have here in Lake Michigan and the other places, it's a bad idea.
Jason, could I jump in?
Yeah.
I know this is a conversation.
It is.
But I would add to what my colleagues have said here about the Gulf spill. Bottom line is, it is a tremendously terrible impact that we've seen there. But we sometimes forget, even in our conversation today, that the oil that's spoiling the beaches, the wetlands areas, it's a huge problem. But the jobs that it's costing as well. The human problem that's come up is something that I've been frustrated to watch this administration handle, almost in a cavalier way, where you will put a moratorium on drilling, which takes more people out of work, which doesn't do anything about dealing with the cleanup. And you have 13 foreign countries that offer their sources and resources to help clean up, and we reject that. We won't suspend certain laws to allow things like that to happen, and yet we put people out of business. Now that's something we have to address as well. One spill that could have been dealt with in far different ways, probably more effectively, that's cost jobs, the environment, and is making it more difficult for people to see how we eventually can be sufficient with our own fuel sources.
Question for all three of you. We'll start with Mr. Rooney. I'm hearing a lot of agreement among the three of you on a lot of the issues that we're talking about, at least broadly speaking. You all bring different experiences to the table, but I'd like to know if can you explain to us and to the voters, where do you differ significantly on the issues from each other? What ideas do you have that are better than what your candidates, your opponents would propose doing?
The biggest difference, you know, a lot of us come to the same answer because we're conservative Republicans. But how you get there is important as well. The thought processes, the wisdom behind how you get there, that's important to the voters to know that when you're crafting legislation, when you're signing on to legislation and you say, hey, this looks good on paper, but I have the real world experiences that show it works on the ground too. When you have career politicians that have been down in D.C. or in the halls of Lansing, they sometimes lose touch with the real world. And for instance, when I was in the Marine Corps, there was a Secretary of Defense that was a fine man, and Don Rumsfeld was, but he wasn't getting the job done in Iraq. And when we got a new Secretary of Defense, Secretary Gates, we finally started winning the war in Iraq. And sometimes you need a new quarterback in there to advance the ball down the field. I'd say on a specific issue, I've always been a flat tax advocate myself. I could live with a fair tax, but I have some issues with it that I need to get addressed before I'd be a full supporter of it. I believe at least one of my opponents is an advocate for a fair tax first and then a flat tax second. So that's on an economic level, that's probably one of the biggest differentials between.
You're the fair tax guy? You were nodding, Mr.
I am a fair
Carlson.
tax guy, yes. And see, what we don't recognize when we're talking about flat tax, we don't eliminate the IRS and all the compliance issues that are associated with income taxing. That's why we have to eliminate it, because the onerous regulation and the thousands and thousands of pages of federal regulation as it relates to the IRS simply are unconscionable. When I make my income tax return, basically I have a book-length return because I'm involved in a number of partnerships and a number of businesses, and that's simply, I have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on compliance. It's simply not tenable. I'm different from the other two candidates in that not only do I advocate for a balanced budget amendment, but I'm not prepared to support earmarks. Both of these gentlemen in Lenawee County in former conversations that we've had said that they are not against earmarks. I think with the expanded role of government that we've seen under Obama and Shower, and the increasing federal deficit now to $1.2 trillion, we simply don't have the money to advocate for earmarks. Now,
Doesn't that mean everybody else gets something?
No,
and then we get left out?
that's what we have to change that mindset. When we go to Washington, there's going to be a lot of different folks like myself who have business backgrounds say no to all of that. And that's why we need to eliminate the career politicians who go along to get along and scratch some other people's backs to make sure that they're earmarks. Tim Walberg, for example, he voted to allow lobster study of the to promote dog pellets. Now, and of course that was necessary for Tim to support that, to gain support for the earmarks that he brought, 35 million of them, by the way, to 7th Congressional District when we were running huge deficits. Does that make sense? When we have huge deficits and then take $35 million out of that federal budget and put it to use, maybe effectively, but did we prioritize? We simply don't do that.
Mr. Walberg, did you...
I think they're calling you a career politician, so let's hear
And
it.
I
suppose, you know,
a lobster lover.
Well, I do like lobster, and I think a lot of people do, except my wife. But it's interesting to hear about career politicians, 20 years in the private sector, 8 years between the State House and my 2 years in Congress, and that makes me a career politician. But I think, Marvin, I need to correct you. At that Adrian debate, I said that I had signed on, I don't know whether you have or not yet, but I've signed a pledge for a moratorium on earmarks.
I have, Tim.
And the majority of my former colleagues in the U.S. House have signed that as well, and a number of candidates. And I very clearly informed you that I was never bribed or cajoled to vote for somebody else's earmarks to get communications for public safety funding back for our district, airport runway projects that were required that came from aviation fuel tax dollars that our citizens paid for, roads and bridge projects that I supported, and education projects. We took plenty of requests from the local district, and we went through all of those and make sure, first and foremost, they didn't violate the Constitution. Second, that they weren't pork, but they were justified because our taxpayers had paid for them. In going back, I'm just going to have to commit myself more, and I think that's where the purpose of sending one who understands how to work within the system and has stood strong to the point that in doing that, Americans for Tax Reform and Dick Armey's group, the Tea Party group, has supported me. And they've looked at my voting record against spending taxpayers' money unnecessarily and spending it for appropriate